Welcome to The Safe Space, the podcast that's about those things in life that affect our romantic relationships and how we can identify and manage them for the benefit of ourselves and our relationships. I'm Yvette Johnson and my co-host is Ian Fraser. We both have a keen interest in mental and emotional well-being, as well as the dynamics that affect romantic relationships. And in this podcast, we'll share our personal experiences as we chat to a range of experts about the good, the bad, and the unhealthy of relationships. We hope you learn as much as we did from these conversations. Before we begin, though, a quick disclaimer. This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not offer mental wellness advice. If you or someone you know is in need of professional help, we have some links for you at the end of the episode and in the show notes. So welcome to our very first podcast. Relationship Issues is the series that we're embarking on. It's Yvette Johnson and Ian Fraser, and we're here with our expert for today's session. That is Dr. Michael Kallenbach, couples counselor, relationship therapist. Right up our alley, exactly what we're looking for, because we want to talk about relationships, because there is not a human being on this planet that will not have to deal with relationships. And what are we always hearing? What's the most important thing in relationships? Communication. So I thought, let's find someone that is understanding this stuff. We have questions. We want explanations. Not everyone can afford therapy. Not everyone can afford to pay for the time, which you are so generously giving to us, Michael. Thank you. To see a specialist and to talk to someone about these things. So now we're having this conversation. We've got questions to ask based on our own experiences, and we're going to learn.
Michael, welcome.
Thanks very much for having me on the podcast.
It's good to have you here. I'm not going to lie. I'm slightly intrigued and a little bit intimidated going into this, simply because there's a lot of gray areas, and I think a lot of people who will listen to this will also feel like, am I communicating well enough? What's going on? Why is this not working? So I'm sure you've got a good starting question to get us going here, Yvette.
One of the first things that Michael said to me when we touched base for the first time is, I'd like to talk about communication because people don't communicate. And when they come here, they have problems with communication. And that was so interesting to me because that's what you always hear. Whenever you ask around, I'm talking about when you have social gatherings with friends, everyone's dealing with a relationship. And everyone will say, communication is the most important thing in relationships. And so clearly, it must play a big role if you, as a counselor and therapist, said, I want to talk about communication. And how on earth do you know you're doing it well? So there's so much to talk about. Do you agree?
I agree. There's a ton to talk about when it comes to communication. But if you communicate with buying a newspaper or going to the post office to post a letter, and you don't communicate well with the person behind the counter, or if you're buying something, I think it doesn't have to start in relationships. It can start at the shop or over the counter. We all communicate. If someone makes a delivery and is banging your doorbell incessantly and you get irritated, you can be irritated, and that's where the communication starts. So it doesn't necessarily start with relationship. That's the relationship you have with the person that you're irritated with, who's delivering something to you, but you don't live with that person. You live with your partner, your husband, your wife, or your spouse. And that's why it's so important, because you're with them not 24/7, but you're with them most of your life and most of the day or most of the night anyway. So that's why it's so important. But if the guy or woman who's delivered something, a package to you, and you are irritated that they didn't ring your doorbell properly, or they rang the doorbell too long and it irritated you. So there's already a communication gap. Yeah. And how do you resolve that? And do you say to them, hey, listen, next time don't ring the bell so loudly. I've got small kids, they're sleeping. Or I'm busy teaching piano lessons. Why are you disrupting my piano lessons? It's not their fault because they didn't know that. But I'm wondering, I think that's where it starts. It doesn't necessarily have to be with a partner or a relationship. That's where the communication starts. And I think people are really crap at it, if I may say so.
Well, I think so, because what you're highlighting something that I have thought about so much is that how do you know when you should bite your tongue about whatever the issue is, the irritation is, and I'm speaking now specifically of the romantic relationship of the person you live with, be it the husband, partner, whatever. How do you know? I look back now at a previous relationship and I'm like, oh my word, maybe I should never have said all those things. I should have shushed. I should have just bitten my tongue. But how on earth do you know? When must you say, yes, okay, this is an issue, let's address this? Because you're offending and hurting someone, or they are sensitive about it, or they're insecure about it. It's so difficult to navigate communication, is it not?
Well, I think everyone's got their own insecurities and their own anxieties about anything. I don't think there's anyone who isn't insecure or isn't anxious about something. But if you continually don't discuss things, as people often do, or don't discuss it, then you push it under the carpet, you sweep it under the rug, and it festers and it becomes a bigger thing. So I do think it's important to speak about things if you're if you're in a relationship, but it's when you speak about it, finding the right moment, and also I think how you do it, and that's really important. If you tell someone, you're real getting on my nerves today because I didn't like the way you chewed your food at lunch, and you eat like a pig, or you could say, could you just try to make less noise when you pick up your knife and fork. I mean, these are real issues that irritate people. And this came up during COVID a lot when people were sort of strung together because of the health crisis. And, it's how you do it and it's how you manage the crisis. I really don't believe that you shouldn't say anything. I think it's important in couple relationships to be able to have the confidence in the relationship to speak out and say what you're thinking, but it's how you do it is really, really important. And that's the key to it all.
Let's rewind. Let's go back to the building blocks of communication, because not all of us are raised equally when it comes to being able to talk. There are so many different scenarios where people are just unable to voice their opinion. It might be a strict home. It might be that a million different things. But you arrive at adulthood, let's call it in your 20s, here you are, and you're in a relationship, and you don't have those tools. What are those tools? What do people need to be able to talk to a partner, a significant other?
Well, I suppose a bit of sensitivity to start with, going back to what I said. How do we treat our partners? Do we treat them with respect? Do we treat them with appreciation? Do we treat them with affection? Do we treat them with caring? And that's really quite important. Or do you just say, you really pissed me off by the way you chew with your mouth open, or you eat too loud, or the way you blew your nose? It really irritated me. And I think it's okay to tell your partner they irritate you, because we all irritate each other. No one gets it right. That's part of the good and bad of any relationship. We bring a lot of good to a relationship, but everyone's got some bad side. We've all got things that irritate us, that piss us off. So it's how do we manage it, and how do we learn the tools? And, it's not my job here to promote therapy. I think everyone should be in therapy, but it depends who the therapist is, of course. But I think part of being in therapy is getting the tools to be able to manage these relationships a lot better than people have been. And probably that's often the reason why they come to therapy, because they can't manage it themselves. Who do you go to? Your family. A therapist can often tell you things that your family don't have the courage or conviction to tell you. Often friends and families tell you what you want to hear, where therapists, I think, are much more impartial. They're not part of family or friends, so they're able to say things perhaps a little more directly.
So you're telling us that don't wait until you're in a crisis point where the relationship is really close to just absolutely hanging by a thread, because that's what happened to me, I think, in a previous relationship. And I can share that with you, is that you just get to a point where you don't talk anymore because you feel like it always leads to an argument. Have you seen a lot of that?
Well, people argue, because a couple argues doesn't mean the world's coming to an end. People have arguments. My point is that how do you manage the arguments? How are you able to argue in a safe, secure place to say, look, you really pissed me off yesterday by doing such and such. Perhaps we could talk about how we can do it better next time. I mean, that's quite kind way to say, how can we do it better together next time? We're not talking about leaving the relationship. But I think people are scared to argue because it spirals and they don't know how to rescue it. But, when couples come to therapy, they come when it's pretty bad. Very few people come when the sun's shining like today and there's blue skies out there. People come when the sort of shit hits the fan, if I may say that, and the relationship's in crisis. No one thinks, why should I go for therapy? Everything's fine. We're having a great time. We're going on picnics. We're going to the movies. We're watching Netflix. We're having a good time. Our kids are fine. No one then thinks, perhaps we should just go and scoop things up and talk about our problems or what could come up. People go when they're in crisis, and you're absolutely right. They're scared to talk to each other, and then the therapist becomes the therapy room becomes a safe space for couples to go and air their grievances.
Do you agree with that, If, as a man? Because I've found, as a woman, in my personal experience, multiple relationships, that really guys don't want to do therapy most of the time. How do you feel about therapy?
Gee, my experience is different. Without bringing any people into the conversation, I've had the experience of a woman who doesn't want to have therapy and got up and left the therapy session. And I think that was a deeper problem. I'm going to defer back to you here, but it was a deeper problem where they couldn't talk because they had their own issues. So it kind of leads me nicely to a question then, which I wanted to say was, we're assuming that this communication or breakdown or argument, etc., is happening within a, in inverted commas, healthy dynamic. What happens when there's mental illness, when there's certain symptoms of one of the partners where they physically can't deal with the other partner in a reasonable way? The fashionable term nowadays is narcissism. Everyone loves that term. Oh, it's all over everyone's lips. But I use that right now and go, okay, well, what happens if the narcissist out of the two actually doesn't want to deal with it because it's quite a nice place for them to be? That's a whole nother set of conversation.
When people call me to make the first appointment, I always ask if they're both on board to come for therapy, because if people don't want to, if one of the parties doesn't want to be there, it makes the work really difficult. So then if one is dragging the other by the ear into the therapy room, it's very difficult to work with couples if one doesn't want to be there. And very often people come as a last resort, and then they say, we even went to therapy and it didn't work, but they've already decided perhaps that they've had enough of the relationship and they want out, and they're doing it for the other. But I try to establish right at the beginning that both parties want to be there, because it's very difficult to work with a couple if one doesn't want to be there. So I try to establish that. To go back to the narcissist, yes, of course narcissists are happy in their place. I mean, Donald Trump, I think, is the most prime narcissist I know. He's very happy. I think he's leading in the polls at the moment, and narcissists have no room to hear other people's point of view, and they're quite happy in their little world. And if you watch, let's take Donald Trump. I think he's a prime example of a narcissist. If you watch him, the way if you ever see him at a press conference or something, he's always blaming the journalists. It's always somebody else. It's never themselves. So I think in therapy, I imagine as a therapist, this is just my fantasy, but I imagine it would be really, really impossible to work in the therapy room with someone like Donald Trump. And I don't want to bring politics into your program, but there you go.
So then that does then affect communication. That's the essence of what we're talking about here. How do you communicate with somebody who doesn't want to be communicated with? Give up.
Yeah, and a lot of people find therapy just too hard. It's too difficult. Do we really want to unpack? It's very hard. It's not an easy journey.
And it is a journey, isn't it? Because I've, in my experience, that's all I've got is my experience, and what one reads from experts that write and whatnot, is that the guys tend, in my experience, to want to do 1 or 2 sessions, and then they're like, okay, but now we're sorted. We've been to therapy. Everything's fine. Like, they don't seem to understand. And I want to know if you experience that too, as the professional, that, is it so? Is it common that the guys, I mean, I'm sounding like I'm lamenting the men here, but, they tend to think, no, it's not necessary. It's not a long-term commitment. Whereas I always think, this has to be a process. We're going to do a few months and we have to be consistent. Is that something that that makes sense to you?
Well, that's what I advocate, but I don't think you can turn it into gender stereotype.
Really?
But I think in general, my experience, I mean, there are more women therapists out there than men, but I think women are much more emotional in general and men are much more logical. But I'm sure if people listening to this might disagree with me, but that's my experience. But it doesn't mean men don't want to deal with the emotional and don't want to hear the emotional. And I think if they particularly want to save their relationship, or their marriage, I think they on board to give therapy a go. I don't think they come for one or two. In my experience, they are not coming for one or two sessions and saying, "Okay, that's it, I'm cured now." It is a process, and I don't think you can sort of manage it in one or two sessions. So that hasn't been my experience.
Oh, well, that's wonderful news. That's very encouraging to hear. Is there in your experience, a scenario where you should just say, "Okay, this is a mess. This is toxic. This is abusive," because of, say, narcissism or alcoholism or drug addiction? Do you encounter a lot of situations where you find that this couple are wasting their time? How can you give us a bit of background on that sort of thing?
Well, I think in couple work, there's two options. One is couples can change and get on a different road,
Yes.
because it hasn't worked, and that's why they're in the room.
Yeah.
So whatever their relationship is, it's not working. How do we together try to do things differently? Or part of the work is to be honest with each other. I can't tell couples this, but they have to decide that they want to separate out. And it's terribly, terribly painful and terribly difficult, particularly when there are kids involved. But you can help unravel and unwind the stuff that can help them separate, if that's what they want to do. But that's not my role as a therapist. I don't give advice. I can't tell people. People often say, "Do you think we should get married?" Or that's not my role. They have to decide that. I'm not in the marriage with the couples, with the clients. But those are the two options that one has. I believe. Either you're going to go on a different route and let's try and make this better, or we can't always fix it, but we can make it better or try to, or the couples have to decide themselves that this isn't what either or the other wants. And, it's terribly, terribly painful. It's a pretty rough road, but you have to sort of work with them and go along with them on this road.
If you're on this journey and you sit down with Michael, we're a couple, we chat, how long does this process take? Of course, it's going to take longer for some, shorter for others. But is there too much? Do you end up saying to your clients at some point, "Look, you've had 12 weeks with me. If you haven't sorted it out by now, there's nothing else I can do to help you"? Is there an end? Is there a cycle?
It's like saying, how long is a piece of string?
Right.
Some people are in therapy for months on end or even years, and some people on proper analysis, and some manage to feel better after half a dozen sessions. But I usually suggest to clients that why don't we have a run of 6 sessions, see how it goes, and then we can reassess it. And in those, you'd never know what's going to come up in the room, what work is going to come up, what people are going to bring. And also it does give you a chance and the clients to feel comfortable with the therapy and realize how they can use the tools in therapy in say we have 6 weeks, but very often it extends and people want to continue. But to come back to your point of it's very, it's not a cheap ride, and it's quite expensive, and it's a financial commitment as well.
I'm very interested to hear that you'd give them a certain amount of time that would, morph into whatever it is. You've alluded to the fact that, we all have to communicate. Some people do it better than others. Are there some tools that anyone listening to this right now can go, "Okay, I'd like to try that. That's a good piece of advice"? Something that's a common theme throughout the couples that you've counseled.
I think the idea is that couples can manage without the therapy. So in an ideal world, if you're ending therapy with a couple, it doesn't mean you've solved everything or we've come up with all the answers together, because there's 3 in the room. it's not just me and not just them. It's them and me together. And we don't always have all the answers, and we don't manage to solve everything. But I think it's important if couples are able, let's say they've stopped the therapy. I think it's quite important if they set a time a week aside and they don't switch on their mobile phones, and they might have a drink at a certain hour, and the kids are in bed or the kids are playing outside, and they just talk about the week together, that they're able to discuss what they did together, what they liked about each other, what they didn't like about each other, but they're able to talk to each other about that without a third, i.e. the therapist there. I think that's a really lovely exercise, and I sometimes suggest that to couples when they stop therapy.
I always refer to the current state of humanity. As a therapist, surely you have some insight in that, in like who's coming to you at the moment. Like, obviously you can't divulge details. I'm not asking for that. But like, what is the state of relationships out there at this stage based on your average experiences?
I'm going to answer that quite simply. Everyone can do therapy. We've all got, as you said earlier, we've all got baggage. We've all got an internal couple. What we saw growing up, it might not be a couple, it might have been a single parent, but we've all got that stuff that we saw growing up, and we bring that into our new relationship. So you're going to bring one things, you're going to bring a different thing. And how does it merge? How does it work? How do we fit as a couple? And sometimes it explodes.
It certainly does.
It's pretty rough, it's pretty volcanic. But, I think therapy is for everyone.
Well, why? You're saying something that I feel very passionate about. Everyone should be in therapy, and I couldn't agree more. Do you think that's an extreme thing to say?
Well, I'm a therapist, so I would say that, and it is a bit of an expense. I mean, not everyone's got medical aid that pays for the therapy. It is a bit, I don't want to say it's a luxury. I think it's a responsible thing. I think if a couple or an individual is struggling with self-esteem, with self-worth, with confidence, with self-awareness, why shouldn't they be in therapy? I mean, that's what therapists are there for. But there is the question, do I have the time? Do I have the commitment? Because it is a commitment. And do I want to go through this? Because you're unpacking a whole lot of stuff that you might not even want to talk about or hear about. But the therapy, in the therapy room, that's one place where you can actually unpack and bring whatever you want to the therapist. The therapist doesn't sit in judgment. The therapist isn't a friend of yours. But the therapist is on the journey with you to try to make things different. It doesn't necessarily mean better, but it can make it different. But I think, I would say, I think everyone's got issues. There's no one who's fancy free and never had issues. Or, every family, there's no perfect family. There's no perfect relationship. So, I think therapy is a good tool.
Oh, well, I agree with that.
So you've mentioned the current state
of humanity
society, and relationships, and I'm using air quotes here. You've explained this from the point of view of, everyone has a different background, etc. I'm going to bring it back to the core of what we started talking about, and I want to ask you this. How has the mobile phone, social media, screen time, outside influences via text message, via WhatsApp, via direct message on a social media platform, how has that influenced A, communication, and B, couples?
Well, I'm going to be perfectly honest. I on a personal level, I'm not on any social media other than WhatsApp, and I think it's all dangerous for couples.
Really?
I think it's...
Wait, stop.
Why?
Why?
Yeah.
Because people should communicate face-to-face rather than text. And if they don't text, they're in trouble. And if they text too much, they're in trouble. Or if someone picks up someone else's... I'm making all this up, of course, but if someone picks up someone else's phone inadvertently, and I don't think couples should read each other's messages anyway, but say you look at someone's message and there's a heart, and the other person reading it thinks, oh, they're in love with them, they're having an affair with them. And the heart is just a little friendly symbol of, great, I love that picture you sent me. It's nothing sexual, no connotation about a relationship. And then it's misread and misinterpreted. For my part, if Facebook and Instagram and all that didn't exist, I think couples will be better off. That's just my own personal view. But I often see someone says, they didn't even text me when they're leaving work. Well, let's say what did we do before the text? What did we do before the mobile phone? So they don't text and say, hi, I'm leaving work. I'll see you in 10 minutes. So the other person who doesn't get the text is so worried and so anxious what's happening to that person in that half an hour that it takes them to get home. So I think people can't win with social media. I think people were better off without it. But that might sound like I'm being a grumpy old man and really old-fashioned, but those are my views.
It's a very, very legitimate opinion, insofar as I think, because I'm of a generation where I remember no social media, and then I remember social media. And that transition, while it was exciting in the beginning, new opportunities to meet new people, became a real burden at some stage. So I'm kind of with you on that. I think society was better off communicating face to face.
I think couples should, to say someone like, "Can you do the shopping? I'm stuck in the traffic. Can you go to X, Y, and Z shop? And can you please get food for the kids?" I think that's okay. Or I'm stuck in the traffic. I'll be there in half an hour. That's okay. But where people have expectations about, you never told me that you're leaving the office, or you never even thought of me throughout the day, and the other person who didn't think of them said, I was in meetings back to back, I didn't have any time. Well, to be honest, it takes 30 seconds to say, hi, how's your day going? I'm missing you. Hope all's well.
Yeah.
But that doesn't happen to the people who are expecting it, and they feel let down. So I think it's not a great win situation.
It's just touchy. It's just too risky.
It's very risky. So if you send something in, what time were you here? And people are so suspicious. And it's a lot about trust, because in these texts, trust is eroded a lot. And in olden days, we'd pick up the phone and we'd have to dial one of these rotary phones and say, hi, I'm leaving the office now. I should be home at 6 o'clock if there's no traffic. And if there's traffic, what did you do? So I'm from a different generation to these electronic devices. But I don't want to sound like a grumpy old man.
No, you know what? I'm a little bit younger than you, and I feel like social media is not doing us well. And cell phones are horrible. And we bring them into the bedroom, and we sit in each other's company, and we're on the phone, and it just breaks a relationship down. And yes, you don't know what your partner's doing. You might have all the trust in the world, but then one day, as you say, you inadvertently pick up the cell phone and there's a heart. Like you say, this is 100% accurate. I've seen it with friends, and I've heard of it with girlfriends. And I'm bringing my bias to you as an expert and saying to you that you think you can trust somebody, but you don't know. You're saying that you don't think couples should read each other's messages and look at each other's phones. Now, in a previous relationship, if I may say, we did know each other's passwords and we did have access to each other's phones, and I liked that. What do you think of that? Is that okay? Because what happened is he would often then just take my phone and read it, which I thought was a little over the top, and he would misinterpret messages. As you just said, that little heart can be seen as something that it isn't. True, that's true. But I do think it's important to have that transparency where I can access your phone. I want to see that you're not hiding anything and that you don't have anything to hide and that you're not going to put your phone away or take it with you to the toilet when I'm in the room alone. That sort of thing. Do you think that's okay?
Well, I can't prescribe what other couples do, but I'm wondering why you think it is. You think it's okay. And it's about trust, isn't it? If you trust someone, why do you want to look at their messages? And if they've got a message, say it's a joke or a meme or something quite funny or a cartoon, they'll show it to you and say, look, I got this from my friend. And don't you think it's funny? You can allow the person owning the phone to share that with you. Why do you have to pick up their phone? Don't you think that's a bit of privacy that we should each have, is our own phone and our own messages? And we've got friends that we chat with, or school friends that we banter with, and there could be sort of rude jokes. There might not be appropriate jokes, but there's something that we can keep private about our phone. And I'm throwing this back to you, but why do you feel it's okay to pick up other people's phones? That's my question to you.
Well, you know what? I think that is definitely, that is something that I will call it a bias, because I will say it's a trust issue, because based on past experience and based on things I've heard, that the phone has become that place where things happen that shouldn't happen. And I think we need to be accountable to each other. I want to be able to look at your phone. Like, I know of a girlfriend who recently had her discovered messages that she didn't understand were there, and he had deleted all his messages when she could only see the other party's messages. And these things are inappropriate. And how do you know it's safe? You don't know until you've looked and tried. I mean, do you just blindly trust someone? Like, I think it's so risky in today's day and age. We didn't have those cell phones in the past.
Can I jump in here?
Yeah.
I'm completely of the opposite opinion.
Really?
I'm in the other side of the room.
Wow.
So when I'm in a relationship, carry on with your phone. Please, I don't want your passwords. I have no interest in reading your phone. Here's the thing. If you're going to self-sabotage, or you're going to sabotage the relationship by talking to somebody else in a way that I wouldn't like, you're going to do it anyway. Whether I have access to your phone or not, you're going to do it in one way, shape, form or another. And I'm going to find out that relationship is doomed. So I have, call it a fatalistic approach. I'm like, well, if you're going to kill the relationship, go for it. I'll find out eventually. And I save myself massive anguish, massive stress. Anxiety, because I don't worry about someone else's phone. If they show me, as you said, Michael, they show me a phone, I go, cool, that's amazing, haha. But I don't worry about their phone. That's my feeling anyway.
I also think there's some non-sexual, non-relationship issues that we often embarrassed about the phone. So often people send what I would consider racist things to me.
Right.
And I'm talking about white South Africans of a certain age who still think it's okay to send sort of racist comments around, or a racist joke. I'm sort of quite ashamed to get them. And I don't have the guts to say to that person, hey, look, this is really racist. Please don't send this to me. And I also don't want to send it on. And I'm not as proud that person has sent it to me. So I don't want anyone to see it. I just want to keep that to myself and think this person's got racist ideas or tendencies. And I like them as a friend. I don't appreciate their politics or their racism. But I don't want to take them on. And I don't want to show that to anyone. I don't really want anyone to see that I've received it. So there's another aspect of phones. It's sort of private. People are sending something to you. They might think you agree with their views and you don't. But I think there's aspects of this that you want to keep, that I don't want to share with the world. And I just want to go back to something you said earlier, that if someone's being unfaithful in a relationship, the other who isn't, somewhere along the line, unconsciously or not, they know. It's the way they hold their phone, the way they look at their messages close to their breasts, the way they take the phone to the bathroom, or the way they go in the shower and take the phone and leave it outside the shower. I think the other will always know. So I don't think you need to have each other's passwords and all that. I think if someone's having an affair, this is just my view, my personal view. I think the other person, somewhere along the line, the person who's having the affair will be found out, and I think that the one who isn't having the fun knows along the line.
I guess it makes sense, like Ian says. You don't want to sit in anguish and anxiety thinking, what is he doing? What's happening? And I think a lot of women I know, we do. We were like worried, what's on the phone? What's on the phone? We can't leave it alone. And I think it's a reality.
I think a lot of men are worried too what's on the phone. It's not just...
I can just speak for women.
I can speak to women go to the gym and they might fall in love with their gym instructor. Right. The men are equally worried. Right? It's not just women.
Temptations everywhere.
And by the way, I don't want to harp on the phone thing, but if my partner wants to see my phone at any time and she requests it, take my phone, go bore yourself to death. You know what I mean? Carry on, because I have nothing to hide. Yeah, I'm just saying. And by the way, yes, at the gym, in the supermarket, and on a random Thursday afternoon in Woolworths, you might bump into somebody and go, "Oh, fancy them," and the next thing it's overs get overs. So
yeah, true.
It's an interesting, I find the problem with this conversation, and it is a problem, is that there's too much to talk about. There's too much about communication to actually cover in one podcast. You've shared some very good tips on essentially what people should do in talking to each other, set mobile devices aside, spend quality time together. If someone's listening to this, maybe you want to jump in here, Yvette, as well. If someone is listening to this, when is it necessary to push the button and go, we need to go and get help? Because often that process gets delayed for months until it's too bad.
So much. Yeah.
And I really want to know from you, what is that time frame? When do you go, okay, now we push the button, pick up the phone, make an appointment?
It's really a difficult one because both have to want help. And often, if one is thinking of leaving the relationship, they don't really want to go for help. They don't want to save the relationship. So it's a really difficult one. And they both have to be on board. And often you hear from people who say, oh, well, we were talking about it last year, but we never got round to it. And as I said, it's a hell of a big commitment going to therapy. It's not only the time, but it's the cost. And it's the commitment from both the therapist and the client. So it's a really big commitment. And I think people might not just be ready for this. Or they might have 2 kids who are just starting nursery school or starting school, and they've got to spend the funds on paying for the schooling. And they get so caught up in their own jobs and their own schedules that they just don't have time to think to therapy. And I would say this, but therapy is so important. I mean, saving your marriage is more important than saving your job, I think. But anyway, there you go.
Well, I like what you said earlier about, just to touch, just to sort of reiterate what you've highlighted. I like what you said earlier about sensitivity in how you handle things. It's not the fact that there is communication problems or conflict. It's how you handle it. And you need to learn that somewhere. And we're not necessarily, it's not like we're being taught that in schools. And our parents weren't necessarily experts at how to communicate or how to argue. And yeah, I've heard people say, argue right, argue constructively. So I think these are things you learn from a therapist at the end of the day. I mean, where else are you going to learn?
I have to be honest, I haven't heard those expressions. How do you argue right? I would throw it on its head and say, as I've said earlier in this podcast, that I think the world doesn't come to an end because you have an argument. Couples argue. People who say, I never saw my parents argue. Well, they might not have seen them. I'm not saying they didn't argue, but they said, I never saw them. So they try to protect the kids. I think I don't want to say it's healthy to argue, but that's what couples argue. That's what people do. And a kid can withstand that and still be secure in the boundary of the family unit, because the world doesn't fall apart because people argue. But I think it's a dance we do, and it's how we, in relationships, how we divvy up the chores, that one doesn't feel they're doing too much and the other's doing nothing. How do we appreciate each other? How do we say thank you? How do we care for each other? I'm not saying, and it's not my job to tell couples to make breakfast for the other one and put petals around the bath when they have a bath and put rose petals. I don't do that sort of...
Sounds great.
I don't sort of do that sort of stuff. But if couples decide to do that, that's absolutely fine. But that the other one appreciates the other for doing that. And I think that's really important. How do we feel wanted? How do we feel appreciated? How do we feel valued? And I think the biggest thing, how do we feel cared for? Caring, I think caring for the other in a relationship is really important. And, no one gets it right, by the way. There's no perfect relationship.
That's good news.
Well,
that's good news.
That's good news, as long as you can help, as long as people like you can help us to be better.
Yeah.
And that's our hope.
Well, maybe different, not better, because when people come, it's often pretty shit. what people bring to the room is pretty difficult.
Yeah.
And if you can change it, I think it's about change. How do we change things? The key, and often people say, however old they are, and they might say, I'm not changing at my stage in life, and I think that's quite a difficult thing too. That's very difficult. And if people don't want to change or can't see there's a possibility of doing something differently.
Well, I think that, as you say, there is so much to talk about. We've now started the conversation, and that is the point of this podcast. We have started the conversation, and now we can start to unpack with each episode the different aspects and things like, the relevant things about this. But I think for me, the takeaway on today's talk, what we've had, is sensitivity. I think that I personally feel that I need to apply that more myself in how I handle conflict and how I handle a partner, showing care instead of, I don't know, resentment, and just being sensitive to that. That's my takeaway for today. Anything from you?
Yeah, it's more of a question than a summary. Do you have to be okay in yourself before you enter into a relationship with confidence, with communication?
So who's the judge of that? We all think we're okay at some point or another, don't we? We all feel on top of the world if we've got a good job, or if we've won some money on the Durban July races, or we've bet correctly on the rugby. We all think we've got it right somewhere along the line. And so who's the judge of that? But I think we take chances in life. We take a risk. And I think people who don't take risks are a little boring.
That's a very good point, because people love to say, no, you must first love yourself and be fine with yourself and be good in yourself before you can love someone else. And
that's me.
I think you learn so much more in relationship than on your own isolated. I think so much more is fixed in relationship than on your own in your little house isolated. That's what I've seen. So yeah, look at us coming from different perspectives.
Look at you smiling, Michael. Clearly you've made some good comments here today that we've learned.
Well, I'm smiling because I think we're coming to the end of the podcast. And, I hope you'll invite me back again.
Oh, absolutely.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. It really has been. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you
the
for
point
having
is
me.
to learn, and I think definitely I have, and to become more self-aware, to see, this is where I can improve. This is my opinions and my experiences are not actually everyone else's experiences. And that's you can only get that perspective when you speak to people. Once again, isolation is not how you're going to learn. Thank you so much, guys. Appreciate it so much. Thank you. Thanks for listening to The Safe Space. You can find Ian Fraser and me, Yvette Johnson, on Facebook. For feedback and questions, kindly email yvettejohnson7@gmail.com. If you need professional mental and emotional help, please don't hesitate to contact SADAG at www.sadag.org. Wishing you emotional, mental, and physical well-being.